there we go.
Okay, looks like we're live.
Yep, a little late. We're going.
I think it's understandable considering the time we got back from the game
Ah,
last night.
that's tough. First world problems. First world problems from Mary.
Yep.
Anyway, let's get going. Would it be
Okay.
cool if maybe one of these days it would stop friggin' raining? Wouldn't that be cool?
Oh,
That would actually be pretty neat if it finally ever did stop raining.
there's been times it has not been raining.
It's been like cloudy and gloomy and miserable, like my soul.
Mm.
All right. Okay. This thing's squared away. Anyway, yeah, a couple minutes late. We get rolling with this in a second. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's good. It's good to get out. It's good to have a weekend. And
Yeah.
um, then again, a cloudy, gloomy day in Gettysburg is better than a sunny day in most places, right?
Not yet.
So anyway, so we'll get going with this now that we're slowly moving around.
Yeah, a
So how
little
are you doing
tired.
today? Yeah, I know you're tired.
I'm tired.
I,
Hey,
I can
morning,
tell.
Grant. Good morning, Caleb.
Hey, I can tell your tire's a little flat today. You're definitely tired.
Well,
Stupid
geez, I didn't go to bed till like
Yeah, I know
3:30.
you're a little late night. Nice last night, but it's okay. Anyway, yeah. So going with this again. It's good to get back to this in the weekend. We haven't done a weekend day one of these in a few weeks. I don't think.
No.
Right.
Morning,
So
Scott.
so be good. It's good to get going again.
The last one we did was an evening one, which I know we both like to do those like maybe once a month, once every other month if we have time,
Are
because
we doing? Are we doing a round table this week? By the way.
we have not announced it. We'll have to push it. I hate to say this, have to push it next week. We have to give people a week's notice.
Yeah.
Oh,
No.
hey, Mark's on here. We spent the day with Mark yesterday. He's glad
Yeah.
to see you guys made it up. Yep.
Yeah. Mark is probably pretty tired too. He's a hero. He did that long
Yes.
drive back, sit in that park lot last night. But
No,
that was
cooked
a that
all the
was
food for us. That was a fun day
that
yesterday.
was that was a great. That was one of those days you bottle and you look back when you're having a miserable day and think about that day. That was a great day. So
Oh yeah, it was an awesome day.
again,
It was
Mark
awesome.
appreciate all
Like it
that
was
stuff.
honestly the best tailgate I've ever had. Great experience at the game.
It was
Um,
fun. It was fun.
like
It's
that was
nice.
my first like Big Ten game ever.
It
Like
was. It was.
like really, which I mean, for me, the thing with we'll get going to war stuff. But anyway, I like the bands. I love the marching bands. They're awesome.
Yeah. No, that's a hell of a band they have. That blue band's a real deal. That was something. I want to see
Yes.
you flip and try to stick that landing. We're gonna try that in the backyard today. See if you can do that.
Wow. No.
Can you
No.
imagine? Could you imagine?
No.
Forget be another casualty at Gettysburg if I tried it. I was damn sure. Anyway, so that's cool. So we'll get going with this. But yeah, we're going to do an episode this week again, finally. But
Yeah.
it's been hard though because it's been busy getting settled and getting everything going. So it's nice to kind of I think we're kind of close to getting back on the swing of things again, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I
you know,
mean, for anybody that's moved, it is quite the thing. Like it takes you a little bit
well,
of transition and all that. And
we're going to so we're going to be doing an episode. We're going to record it this week, specifically on the 1864 Valley campaign. But we're going to focus. We're not going to worry about Guard Hill and Berryville and Third Winchester and things like that. Fisher Hill. We're going to focus on the burning. We're going to
Mhm.
focus on really. It kind of goes. It kind of takes place basically from September 26th to October 4th, 1864. And it's kind of that area around Dalton, Harrisonburg,
Yeah.
that area, if you know the area. And we're going to talk about that. And it's one of those things that, you and I were talking. We went to a seminar the other day on William Tecumseh Sherman, Mary. Perhaps you've heard of him.
Yeah.
Redheaded guy, ginger, angry fella, right?
Yeah.
But we went to that, and you think about the reputation, and the guy who did the seminar is a guy named Derek Mayfield, and he wrote a book,
Maxfield. You have the book right.
Maxfield,
You have the book right
Maxfield
next to you, right?
called oh yeah, called Man of Fire. This is the book right here, and we've studied Sherman forever. A lot of people have, but he really kind of focuses on the misconceptions of his march to Georgia into Savannah and explaining, that historical memory of William Tecumseh Sherman, right?
Yeah.
And anybody who's been to Georgia in that area has talked to people at bars or restaurants, and not everybody goes to bars, Mary, but let's just people
Yeah.
go somewhere, right?
They
The
talk
supermarket,
about it.
the Winn-Dixie Soup Market down there in Georgia. They're running to somebody,
Winn-Dixie.
and they go, "Hey, what do you know about William T. Sherman?" But they're going to talk specifically about all the things he did, and with the thing that happens from us from September 26th, or really the 25th. You think about it, to October 8th of 1864. It really begins on October 1st, is really when it gets going. And all the things that we've said before, all the things specifically that Sherman gets knocked for in the
Yeah.
march, Sheridan does. And
Yeah.
if you're looking for a real villain and you want to talk about those memes of the fire, you see like on the things, and we're guilty of making the memes. Admittedly, we are. I have fun doing those. With Sherman, you really can talk about it with Sheridan. And
Yeah.
it really, and the thing about it is when you look at the overall picture, and we're obviously going to talk about this, we're going to talk about this when we record this episode, but you talk about the death of a guy named John Rogers Meigs. You heard of him, Mary?
No, I haven't.
Okay. John Meigs was a young officer who was the son of a guy named Montgomery Meigs.
Mhm.
Maybe you've heard of him.
Yes, I did. I
Okay.
figured there was a connection.
Well, he was the apple of the eye of Lincoln and Sheridan and a lot of the people in Washington at this time. October 1st, he's going to end up. So what happens is Sheridan's doing his Valley campaign, and what they're doing is the Confederates at this point are having a lot of cavalry, like John Mosby's guys,
Mhm.
and a lot of bushwhacking guys, kind of doing what they can to give a kick in the junk of Sheridan to slow him down as
And
he's
basically,
coming
that's
down.
all they're doing is just that. They're
Right,
not like, we're not talking like Wild Bill Anderson here.
right. And so October 1st is going to be a rainy day, and you're going to have four Confederates in the First Virginia, okay, under a guy named Benjamin Frank Shaver. And they're kind of riding. They just want to see where the Union is and see what they're doing. And they run into a couple of Meigs and a couple of his guys.
Yeah.
And they turn to basically run away. And Meigs halts, and the Confederates turn like young guns.
Yeah.
They're riding. They have their guns under their jackets. They turn and pull their guns on them. Right. It ends up they're all aiming their guns at each other.
Yeah. Like that
right?
Spider-Man meme.
Right. And finally, something happens when a gun goes off, and one of the Confederates gets shot in the junk.
Oh.
He gets shot with the sun don't shine, Mary. He gets shot in the old coin purse, right?
Oh.
And it ends up being a gunfight. Well, at the end of the day, Meigs is going to get shot in the head. He's going to be killed.
Yeah.
And the Confederates are going to run away. Well, they're going to find Meigs' body the next day. And if you ever go to Arlington National Cemetery, where Meigs is buried, he's got a fantastic grave of a statue of him lying there dead on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And it's wrong, though, because the statue, he's lying there, but in real life, like rigor mortis said, his arm was up. He was lying with his arm
weird.
up. Whatever. But Sheridan hears about this and he loses it. And he had orders from Grant anyway to basically burn anything that could help the Confederate war effort. The standard stuff. Well, Sheridan says, the hell with that. We're burning everything because he's that mad. So him and his men go on a rampage, burn around Dalton, Harrisonburg, that part of the valley, if you know the valley. And they literally are, while women are holding their children crying, please don't burn my house. F off. We're burning your house. And he does it. His men are killing pets while their kids are watching.
Oh, that's so...
it's a really, really dark part of American history that, again, doesn't get the attention it deserves. If you're a Sheridan guy, if you're like Miranda is, you ain't gonna like this one, because
I do not like Sheridan,
right?
Neither
But
does
I mean,
she. Just for clarification, our friend Miranda and myself, we do not like Sheridan. I know we both, I think, like, she knows quite a bit about him, and I've studied him as well. I just don't like him because he's a guy that, like, Sherman gets all this blame for all this like terror in Georgia and the Carolinas and stuff. But when you look at how Sheridan is and the fact that he did take sort of got off on making other people miserable.
Short man syndrome.
But his life.
But I mean, he does have some moments where he where he tells his men, that there he is, speaking of Mosby, where does have some moments where he does kind of show a little bit of mercy to his men. I mean, for his men, but a lot of them are individual decisions where people who were out there burning stuff just said, okay, fine, because what some of his own subordinates were like getting this order saying, "Do you want us to burn houses?"
Yep.
And so what they did, they went the night before to these houses and said, "Just so you know, we're coming back tomorrow, and we got to burn all this. So get your stuff, get your livestock, get your goods, get it the hell out of here. Get your hindquarters away from here,
Yeah.
because we're going to come back tomorrow." So they gave them about a day's warning, but they came and they did it. And it's really in the stories of Sheridan sitting back on his in a wagon, firing up cigars, watching people's houses burn,
Yeah.
laughing, having a great time with it. Bad dude, he is. But
Yeah.
we'll talk about that, and it's an interesting aspect of it because it really goes into that hard war aspect of the Civil War
Yeah.
that's kind of going on now, and because as crazy as it sounds, sometimes you got to go hard war to try to end the war,
Yeah. Well,
and
someone
that's what
asked about like
right.
this, like adding, talking about the hard war and how it evolved, and just like
Yeah,
also another question is like rape was rare, which is true.
yeah,
There's not as it does
right,
happen. It does happen. It happens on both sides. It's
yeah.
part of war, which is very, very unfortunate.
But before we go crazy blaming Sheridan like he's some rogue missile,
Yeah.
this hard work came from the top. This came
Yeah.
from Lincoln down,
Yeah.
and the orders to burn everything in the valley, because the valley had been the bread basket for the Confederates the whole war, and
Yeah.
because of incompetence like the great Nathaniel Banks, fellow Waltham, Massachusetts resident, right,
Yeah.
in Stonewall Jackson fighting them back, they couldn't really get them out of there. But Jubal Early's raid into Monocacy, into Washington, really pissed a lot of people off,
Yeah.
and they just wanted this thing done with before something stupid happens. Um, and so Grant is going to give the order to burn everything, but Sherman does it, but he does it in a way which is a little more military. But
His is Sherman's is a little bit more like his has strategy behind it, but it's also psychological. And
right,
we're doing this episode about the burning of the valley and Sheridan, and kind of like how in 64 they have no choice. Like, basically it's like they have to do hard war. And it was something that was obviously, yes, Lincoln and the cabinet did sanction it. They had to. It wasn't going to be like they were going to be like, no, you can't do that. And then Grant's going to be like, no, we're going to do it. It was, I think, a tough decision for them,
mm,
but one that it had to be done. And that's what Sherman said, like when he was, and we'll talk about this in our episode in about a month about the March to the Sea, is that it was not until early November that Grant actually approved for Sherman to go ahead with the March to the Sea.
mm,
Lincoln was really worried at that point. Like, keep in mind, so sending Sheridan off in the valley that's just a few men. Like, well, no, I shouldn't say a few men. It's quite a bit of men. But this March to the Sea was taking, you have Army of the Tennessee, and you have, I think it's is it Army of Georgia under
yeah,
Slocum? I think that's what they called it. You have them that they're going to march through Georgia, and they're basically going to turn their backs on General John Bell Hood and his Army of Tennessee, which, keep in mind, at this point, it's not in great shape. It's
right,
not what it's in bad as shape as it's going to be after November the 30th. But Lincoln's concern with doing that with that many men was, we have an election coming up. And I don't like, what if Hood turns and attacks somebody? Like, what if he
yeah,
starts doing stuff and goes towards Nashville and we don't get there in time? He's not right away on board with the March to the Sea. But finally, I think once I think it was actually the day that he won the election that Grant was
yeah,
like, okay, Sherman, you can do your thing because we've got this now. We've got this. But it was very late. But by that point, Sherman had already done all the work that needed to be done with getting the men that he needed for it, all of
well,
that.
yeah, well,
But it was definitely something that was sanctioned. It had to be by the cabinet. And, but it was something that I think was probably a tough decision to make, because, Sherman's saying to Grant and Lincoln, like, they were like, no, that you're the army of, Army John Bell Hood's Tennessee, that has to be your goal. Because Grant's goal was still Lee. But sending Sheridan off, that Grant can still keep doing his goal of going after Lee, and Sheridan is just wreaking havoc in the valley. You're
Right.
taking all these men Sherman has and you're sending them away from John Bell Hood. That's risky.
Yeah, well, right. But I mean, but as far going back to the value though, I mean, you have a situation where you have a bag of crap on the Union side trying to take this valley. Talking about guys like Franz
Yeah.
Siegel, right? Guys like David Hunter, right?
Yeah.
Like in Conspiracy Trial, right? And finally, Lincoln and Grant has enough is enough with this. You have Early's raid into Maryland,
Yeah.
going towards Washington, and so you're going from basically when you're looking at just the overall numbers. July of 1864, there's 9,000 Union in the valley. Okay,
Yeah.
in August, there's 40,000. So Lincoln's like, the hell with this.
Yeah.
We're going all in. So this is when he's going to bring in the army of the Shenandoah, and he's going to bring Sheridan in.
Yeah.
And you don't bring, you're dealing with a lot of crap now. This hard war thing, you're dealing with guys like McCausland, burning Chambersburg.
Yeah.
You're dealing with Ulrich Dahlgren's raid. You're dealing with which they thought was a potential assassination attempt on Jeff Davis in the cabinet. And you're dealing with these stories of germ warfare back to the White. So it's getting into an ugly phase with this. But Grant is looking at, okay, if we can just cut off the valley and finally cut the valley off, which we haven't been able to do, and we really starve them out. The whole point was to just get this war over with and just be done with it. And it was going along. But when Meigs gets killed, it goes really dark really quick. That that escalated quickly. That meme. When that happened, it got personal for Sheridan and it got personal for Lincoln. Lincoln, I believe, was actually at Meigs' funeral.
Oh,
when
really?
He was initially, where they buried him is in the front yard of the Lee House.
Oh, really?
Because of his father.
So that started Arlington National
Cemetery.
Well,
that was already on its way. But I mean, if you go there now, you go visit Meigs' grave. I think he was like 22 years old. He was young, and he was a lot like a lot of these young officers who were killed. And when you look at some of the dudes who were killed who were friends of Lincoln in the war, this one hurt them. I mean, this was one especially because the Confederates Shaver was wearing raincoats because it was raining, right?
Yeah.
They thought they were bushwhackers and they thought they were hunted down and murdered. They thought this was one of those situations. This was not. They didn't know it was First Virginia. They thought because there was bushwhackers out here, these people who were just killing for fun. They thought that's who these people were, and they felt that the Confederates and the people needed to be punished. Right off the bat, Sheridan orders everything burned within 3 miles of his site where he was killed. And they did it, and they went with gusto. They went all in, and it really began this era called the Burning. Yeah. And if you still go down the area now, they call it the Burning District. And they were burning 1700s farms, historical Rev War stuff. They were burning whatever they could. They were taking animals. They took so many animals, cattle, pigs. They couldn't carry them anymore. So you know what they did? They put them all in a field and shot them and burned them.
That's what Sherman's guys did, though. The stuff they couldn't take, the bummers, the stuff they couldn't take, they got rid of because, Sherman's attitude towards it was, and I think it was very similar with Sheridan in the Valley. Sherman's attitude was like, we can no longer, it doesn't make sense to have John Bell Hood as my target right now. What we have to do is start taking away their infrastructure, start taking away their supplies. Because guess what? They can have all the men they want. And if they can't get those supplies, if they can't get the ammo they need, the gunpowder, the food, the trains, if we can rip that up and stop them from getting it, it is going to start strangling them. And also too, Sherman knew the psychological aspect that kind of warfare would have. Grant makes mention that the valley did need to be shut down though. Exactly. That's the whole point. Like 1864 is when you study it, this is when hard war comes in. This is when, Lincoln is at the end of his rope with it, as is everybody, and they have to find a way to stop them. And the way to do that was to wage this, what we call hard war now, which is going right at them. And I think Sherman gets way too much criticism for his march to the sea. And I think Sheridan doesn't get talked enough in his destruction. And that's the thing, is we're not we're not saying that what Sheridan, like, we're not saying like, oh my God, he should have done that. But this is a guy who he did take some pleasure in it. And I think that's where some of the bad stories about Sherman's campaign, they did happen on Sheridan's burning of the valley.
Yeah, but when you look right, and when you look at the early, and we have to talk a little bit about, the Berryville and Third Winchester and Fisher Hill and
Yeah.
ultimately culminating in Cedar Creek on October 19th. But really, it's that, and Sheridan did well with the battles. Third Winchester, I mean,
Yeah.
it's all these Confederates trying to do whatever they can to hold back and hold that valley, because this is the first time it's been a real existential crisis
Yeah.
within the valley. And shame on the Union for not taking it earlier, because they should have. They should have.
Yeah.
And when you look at some of the earlier things that happened with that, obviously, Second Winchester, obviously Kernstown, all the bank stuff with Stonewall Jackson, it was a lot of just kind of pillow fighting on the Union side. This is the time they said enough is enough. We have to shut this thing down, because
Yeah.
it turned into starving out the Confederates, starving out Lee, because everything was going on in the Overland campaign, and that we said before that vice is tightening,
Mhm.
right? To hold and it just hold the Confederates down, face down on the ground, and just put a pillow over their face. This is when they finally said enough is enough, and they realized that the hard war aspect, because you mentioned Sherman a while ago.
Yeah.
Part of the initial plan by Grant in this hard war thing was to get some of the Confederates pull away from Petersburg, to come
Yeah.
back, to go home, and it did happen. It did work. A
Yeah.
lot of people did desert, and it happened.
That's what Sherman's idea was too, was those guys
Right.
fighting up in Virginia,
Yeah.
they might be pulled away because their families are here, you know, in
Well,
Georgia.
when we talk about the episode too, is there's a lot of good stories of the women, the Virginia women, really sticking their noses and giving the finger to Sheridan's men in this,
Yeah.
as far as but, and there's a lot of things too. I mean, there was a lot of Masonic stuff with this, where houses of Masons were not to be touched.
Yeah.
That was one of the orders, and so things like that. But what was a bummer for it too was there were Unionists in the area too,
Hmm.
who supported, who had wanted nothing to do with secession, nothing to do with anything. Their houses got burned too. In a lot of cases, they kept the men kept the houses in a lot of cases, but burned the farms and burned the
Yeah.
barns, and that's what most of them did. But they took their animals. And if you're going to have some of the subordinates ordering your men to go and tip them off the night before and tell them to get the hell out, you
Hmm.
have to feel this sort of a moral dilemma here too,
Yes.
where they're kind of saying, okay, we have to do this, but we don't want anybody hurt here. We don't want anybody killed. And there's not a lot of stories of people being killed with this, people being shot.
No.
Um, it's mostly just property.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a situation where, you mentioned there's I don't think there's any case of rapes or
There's
executions.
stories here and there, and that, like, someone
But
did
right,
ask.
but
Oh,
it wasn't like mayhem. Like it was
no.
and it wasn't like they were doing bloody Bill Anderson stuff here and just
No.
executing people and killing people for the fun of it. They were doing their job. But even in those moments, they still kind of held back a little bit. But their orders were to take everything,
Yep.
and they did. They did.
Yep, and that's the part of hard war. And Lou asked, like, on an individual basis, small unit base, like the small units, what restrained men from being more animalistic through much of the war? Was it something like Christianity? I think it was just, you know, there was some level of morals involved, but you do have these off cases where, yes, it does get very brutal. It does get, like, there is stuff that happens that shouldn't have happened.
I mean,
You know,
if you're a human being and you go to someone's house and it's an elderly woman who's living alone, and this is her whole life, and she's
yeah,
bawling her eyes out to protect her house. Yeah, of course you're gonna go and check the house, make sure there's no Confederates, there's no threat. And there are cases where the men did move along. They said, you know what, we're just gonna go. And in some cases, some of the subordinates would post sentries in front of the houses to protect houses
yeah,
in certain situations. So it wasn't like they scorched earth either, but they did more than they didn't.
yeah,
And especially taking a lot of the things, but they did, in a lot of cases, they did tell them to get their stuff and get it out of here. Go take your animals, go hide in the woods, because we
yeah.
come tomorrow. If they're still here, we're taking them.
Yeah.
So there was a certain human element to this too, even in the worst section, the worst part of it. But that burning was real, and that was and when you study, when you go to a lot of these presentations, you talk about Sheridan, you talk about the war. I mean, people here understand it, but a lot of people don't. Was you don't hear a lot about this when you hear you hear about Sheridan, you hear a lot about Murfreesboro, right? You hear a
Yeah.
lot about Cedar Creek. You hear a lot about things like that.
Yeah.
You don't hear a lot about the valley with him. And it's one of those situations where, the darkest parts of our history shine the most light on the
Yeah.
past, that old phrase. It's one that really needs to be studied because these are Americans basically terrorizing Americans.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the reputation, and again, I'm as pro-union and blue as you're going to get.
Yeah.
But I think the historical narrative is a lot of that stuff was done, but by Confederates to
Yeah.
Union stuff, right? But I think you have to look at this. You got to call balls and strikes with this and realize
Yeah.
that this was a two-sided front, and this is the United States Army destroying private property.
Yeah.
And again, it was in their mind for the greater good, because if you can do the hard war aspects and what Sherman does, what Sheridan does, at the end of the day, you're going to save lives by ending the war quicker, and that's kind of
Yeah.
what happened. But you got to talk about it. I mean, you
Oh,
got to
yeah.
talk about it.
Yeah, you have to talk about it, even if it's something that is uncomfortable or whatever. And I mean, it's not I don't like Sheridan. I do respect him as an army guy. I don't think he's as good as what some people say. But
I mean, I don't think there's a lot of people,
no, I like to study
waxing
him.
poetic about Sheridan. Although we did see a
No,
Sheridan reenactor last weekend.
he did. He does a good job.
Mm-hmm.
He does a really good job. There's some good comments in here. Frank's on here.
It's my screen.
So it's the 160th birthday of the Battle of Chaffin's Farm, and it's
Yeah.
also the 193rd birthday of John Schofield.
There you go.
Waterkiller is on here from Germany, which is really cool. There's a couple of people talking about Germans fighting in the Civil War, and there was a book recommendation here.
That's the Mary Bat signal. You know what's
No,
coming.
it's not. No, it's not coming. And then Corey mentions, speaking of escalation of brutality and savagery of 1864, is the 160th anniversary of Centralia, Missouri last Friday. And then Waterkiller was recommending a book to Frank called Call Out the Cadets, which is The Battle of Newmarket by Sarah K. Birrell. I think I'm going to say her name wrong, but she works it's the Emerging Civil War series, which
we know Sarah.
Yeah, we saw her at the anniversary.
Burley. Is it
Burley? Yeah, I have no
Burley.
idea. I don't know.
I always think of the name, the old White Sox pitcher Mark Burley. I always think of her. We're probably totally brutalizing her name, but we know who she is.
Yeah. But speaking of the Emerging Civil War books, we were talking about this with Mark yesterday. Those are great books. They're kind of gateway drugs into studying bigger things. For instance, so we got Derek Maxfield's book about Sherman, which is a biography, and it's obviously not hundreds and hundreds of pages long. It's 200 and something pages long, but I've read I don't know, a few pages of it, and he's a great writer, and it just goes over Sherman's life. I think talks about his reputation, who he was, kind of the good and the bad. And, living here in Gettysburg now, we're very lucky that we can go to certain events that we weren't able to go to before. And one of them, so the one we went to the other night was the Civil War Roundtable here in Gettysburg. And that's where Derek Maxfield was speaking about Sherman.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I shouldn't say it's not accessible. They live stream their meetings on Facebook. So we'll share those whenever they come up, but they do live stream them. They're available for free. So if anybody,
and it's obviously not all. It's not all about Gettysburg either.
No.
I mean, it's a Civil Roundtable of Gettysburg, but we said before, Maxfield was there talking about Sherman, and they have a lot. And that's a really, really good group. And anyone, I'm sure a lot of people here are involved in their own local roundtables. But if you're not, you should look into one, and not just the virtual ones. Go to the personal ones, because you get a lot of insight, and sometimes you get some cool books. My old roundtable back in Massachusetts, I used to get 3 or 4 books at a time. But yeah, that was a good time. We saw some of our friends who were there, and it's great to be able to sit and listen to with like-minded people.
Yeah,
especially presentation style. And of course, on Friday we saw our friend Cody, Mary.
Yes,
that wild man Cody.
Wild man Cody. Over at Seminary Ridge Museum. If you go on their website, They do give free talks some afternoons, usually Friday afternoons. Cody gave a really, really good talk about whether or not Lee was in the cupola anytime during the Battle of Gettysburg, which he concluded, likely not, which was what I've always thought. But
No,
I
he
loved
wasn't.
I loved his presentation of the evidence because it's an example of how like historical memory. Wouldn't it be cool if Lee had been in the cupola? So that's what it kind of evolves into. Like we know Buford was there. There's even stories that Reynolds went up there, but I don't think Reynolds did. The only confirmed one up there that we know for sure was John Buford.
Well, you think about it, it's like and it's such a niche thing. And Cody Acius is so good at what he does, and
Oh
all those
yeah.
people are. But it's fascinating to think that there was probably 30 or 40, about 30 people, I'd say, right, in this auditorium on a late Friday afternoon to talk about whether or not a guy who's been dead 150 years, whatever,
Yeah.
um, was in a cupola. And there was a good debate about it. To go tell your non-Civil War friends that this is a presentation you went to. They'll look at you like
On
you're out of
Friday
your mind.
afternoon.
Yeah, you went to hear about if a guy went up into a climb into a cupola. You guys were there for an hour and a half discussing it.
Yeah, I
But
can
that's
imagine
that.
telling my father that when he asked what I did on
But
Friday
that's
night. I'm like, I went to a talk.
what's cool about it. And obviously, it's the cupola burnt down in 1913. They had to rebuild it. But if you go to the museum, you can pay and you can go up there and go see the museum and go up to the cupola. But it's great to talk about these things, and there are so
Yeah.
many like-minded people, and people get so passionate, right? And I
Mhm.
don't mean like angry, like social media passionate. I mean passionate, like they're so interested in I don't want to say mundane topic, but such a minutia, where James Smith's battery was on Devil's
Yeah.
Den. People fight about that, argue about who broke first the
Yeah.
11th. I mean, we know it was the first,
Yeah.
right? But that's the thing too, and it's such a fascinating concept, and to talk about these things with these people, because that they're smart, they know what they're talking about. But again, but people like Cody, for example,
Mhm.
it's not my way or the highway. He
Yep.
leaves it up to. I mean, a good historian is going to leave it the interpretation of the eye of the beholder,
Yep.
right?
He had us all vote on it, and the votes changed. Like more people were saying no or I don't know at the end of his talk, but there were still people that were saying, yes, I do think Lee was in the cupola. And Cody didn't say, well, you're wrong. He just said, this is what I think, this is the evidence, make up your own mind, which is like, I love that part of it because it's
Well,
not. Mhm.
even the mayor of the mine, Bill Frazanito, wrote that he was in the cupola.
Yep.
But I think the confusing thing about it was they're pretty sure, like really, really, really sure that he was in the cupola at the school at Pennsylvania College. And so I think you hear Lee was in the cupola, you think, oh, we want cupola here in this town. That's what you're gonna think. And you look at all these newspaper clippings about Lee when it burned down, for example, the cupola that Robert E. Lee was burnt down. Blah blah blah. And
Yeah.
it's just, again, it's whether or not he was or wasn't. It doesn't matter. It's such a, no one cares. It doesn't change the cost of beer in anybody's town. But it's fun to talk about because people come at this with a good point of knowledge, and
Yeah.
they'll want to hold on to it. But then again, the more you learn, sometimes you realize that an old dog can learn new tricks. Mary, it
Hmm.
happens. It
Yeah.
does happen.
Frank
All
asked,
right.
did Buster go to the cupola?
I think he's still there.
You have to ask John Gentili that. He's writing the biography.
Yeah, there's a marker to his armpit.
Yeah. Fat Feline, I love that name. Said, I heard that Longstreet had to put guards to prevent desertion once Sherman's destruction became known. Imagine wanting to go back home and not being able to. Hard war was more than one meaning. Yeah, and that's why that's why they did it, because they knew they would kind of like, wow, my wife and kids are back home, and and I'm sure we'll talk about that in the episode. And then Waterkiller's got a good question here. He's like, asking, do you know of any famous German-born generals in the American Civil War? But I mean, good, not Franz Sigel, and or any famous German units. Well, Carl Schurz,
Well, Shizanovsky.
Husky,
Actually,
yep,
no,
because
yeah. Well, he was more. I don't
some of
think
them
he was.
were born in Prussia, which I think is
Yeah,
now Germany.
I mean, obviously,
I don't know. Things were
guys like
really messed up back then.
Schimmelfennig. No, there was quite a bit of them. I mean, Schurz is the one. I mean,
Schimmelfennig,
didn't we visit his grave,
yep,
Schurz?
he's
Oh,
in
but
Sleepy Hollow, New York.
yeah. Schurz is probably the one, but there are a lot. There are a lot of good ones.
Schimmelfennig doesn't
Right,
get
but
talked about for being the guy to go into Charleston, right?
right. But there's the problem. The problem is that you have a lot of ones who had sketchy reputations.
Von
Obviously, guys.
Gilsa.
Von Gils is one, certainly. Siegel, Siegel's a tough one though, because people look at Franz Siegel and he's got that face. He's always got that something smells bad look on his face in every picture you see. But the thing about Siegel is you realize he was good at Pea Ridge,
Oh, put
right?
that man behind some cannons and he's amazing.
I mean,
Anything else though? No.
I mean, right? He had some bad moments with infantry, but his best moment was probably artillery, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Put him behind cannons and leave him there.
Yeah. And so, but no, the Germans here, I mean, 1 in every 4 Union soldiers in the Union Army was born somewhere else. And it was a lot of Germans, a lot of Irish, obviously, Canadians sprinkled here and there, the
Yep.
Tim Hortons cups, right?
Corey mentioned,
Their
yeah,
hockey sticks.
yeah, we brought the hockey sticks over. Those are the bayonets. Corey mentions Osterhaus.
You know, we
Yep.
talked about Oshkosh when we talked about the Lookout Mountains in Chattanooga, and he's Osterhaus is throughout the war. He just keeps showing up. He's like a bad penny, right? But
Yep.
he's good though. But there are a lot of guys like that. But I think people tend to focus on the Eastern Theater because it's the way it
Yep.
is.
But a lot of the big names,
Yeah.
Schurz, Schimmelfennig, I think Krzyzewski went west. They all end up in the Western Theater near the end of the Civil War. Willich.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can go on and on, but there's a lot of that. And I mean, and you can look at like even Russian guys like Turchin. You can look at people like that.
Yeah,
There's a lot of. I mean, it's when you could do that. I mean, that could be an episode I did someday, Mayor, if we did foreigners in the Civil War. I
that
don't
would
know
be cool.
how exciting it would be, but I mean,
Well, I could talk about the two Canadian surgeons.
yeah, Solomon Secord. Yeah, and you were all fired up. They took that monument down.
Well, okay, so I'm originally from Canada, for anybody that doesn't know. Moved here a couple years ago, and yeah, most people know. But anyway, I was like from Southwestern Ontario, and there's a town about 30 minutes north of my hometown called Kincardine, Ontario. And there was a guy from there named Solomon Secord who, for health reasons, around the time of secession, he went down to Georgia because of the climate and stuff. And I would suspect at that time they probably weren't hearing much about it.
They have a fiddle made of gold.
Probably.
Never mind.
Devil went down to Georgia.
Okay, go on.
Anyway, so he goes down there and he gets recruited to be a surgeon in the Confederate Army, specifically with John Bell Hood's guys. Anyway, one of the reasons that Canadian surgeons were actually wanted in the Civil War and needed is because they trained much differently than surgeons in the US. So Canadian surgeons would train more. I think the way they trained them in Europe and Britain and all that was like they would operate on cadavers. So when they did amputations, it was quick because they'd already had experience doing it in medical school. Anyway, so Solomon Secord, he is here at Gettysburg. He's over by, we actually found where he was, the area where he was. What farm was it again?
That was the Plank Farm.
Yeah, the Plank Farm, which is again.
And we got chased off the property by the
I know
owner.
we did. Even though it's owned by Battlefields, the owner chased. Yeah, that's a whole.
That's the only place we've been, and all the places we went where the owner gave us a hard time, rolls that screw. Oh yeah. Well.
But anyway, so he's here at Gettysburg. We don't know if he saw John Bell Hood. We don't know. All that's known about him is that for 24 hours straight, he operated on Confederate and Union soldiers. And he could do an amputation in 10 minutes, which apparently was like, as gross as it sounds, record time. And so he's doing that for 24 hours straight. He stays after the battle to keep looking after the soldiers and operating. He gets captured and sent to prison. And then he finally is like, you know what? I'm good with this. Because I think at the time it came out more about what the war was about. He goes back to Canada. He's he's loved in his community. He was a great person, very respected. Will do medical practice there till he retires. And then he's buried in the cemetery there. Well, I think it was 1910, the citizens of Kincardine erected a monument to him in the town square. And it says that he was part of the war in the South with the Southern Army. Anyway, they had to do some construction there last year and they removed the monument because of the construction. And they recently made the decision that they're not putting it back, that they are decommissioning it, whatever that means. I have come across the word destroy. And of course they said like, oh, we looked at, offering it to museums and stuff, but they don't mention offering it to any museums here. And that was one that really bothered me because
Yeah.
they said, well, we considered putting it in context and explaining what the American Civil War was about and explaining all that, but we thought that might offend people even more. It's like, how are you going to offend people even more if you're explaining that this guy? The other thing too is just like, he probably didn't understand all the causes. He probably was not told. He's coming from another country. Think of Patrick Clayburn immigrating from Ireland. Even though he'd been in the US for a long time and he knew about the slavery issue, he didn't completely understand the causes of the war. So I think someone like Solomon Secord might not have fully understood. I don't think he was going into it like, yeah, I'm going to join these guys. I agree with their cause. He's a
Uh,
surgeon. And
yeah, that's the case of
like,
painting with a broad brush, unfortunately.
yeah. And so, yes, it really bothered me to learn that this thing is not even going to see the light of day anymore because it's an important part of history that needs to be told. Yes, Canadians, for the most part, fought for the Union. There was another Canadian surgeon here. Pretty much, he would have been like a mile away from Secord doing the same thing. And he actually wrote about his reminiscence. I can't remember his name. I think I'll have to look it up. But
Mhm.
we're talking about doing an episode about both of them at some point. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Well,
that
I mean,
like, yes, that got me fired up when I found out they were like,
yeah,
no, I'm
that's the
putting
tough
that monument back.
that's the tough thing about it though, is you have to come and we look, I don't want to come across as some sort of lost cause or person here either, but I think as everyone knows who studies this, is it's gone so far one side with this, right?
Yeah.
You have to look at the context of a surgeon who at the plank farm would have probably worked on Union and Confederates. And
Yep.
then afterwards, he gave it the old quit, went back to Canada, said, "I don't want to do this anymore." That's somebody who should be kind of recognized. It shouldn't be someone who should be whatever.
Hidden from
Again,
history. Like, that part of him should not be hidden from history, because it makes people uncomfortable. Yes,
well,
it's
you
not.
Canadians have been hiding history for years. I will
Oh,
I
I
will
know.
I will tell you about the Toronto Maple Leafs, Mary, about their history, about how they hide that too. But that's another story.
Well, every year we're going to win the Stanley Cup. And then they interview Wendell Clark and he's like, we're not going to win.
Well, I'll tell you about this history. I tell you, them Boston Bruins.
Yep. No,
That's
but
a
not
quick
that,
one.
I mean, we usually don't like talk about, I mean, sometimes we talk about stuff like this on here, but
No,
that
but
was
that
one
one
where I
got
was kind
that
of
that
like,
one.
it's like,
That's
really?
one. Look, I get it. I mean, I get it. But again, that I don't agree with that one either. But
No.
you come around on stuff, and people do, and
Yeah,
that's
no, and
that's
I've read a bunch of articles about it. I've read enough about Solomon Secord, and how they felt about him in the community to know that this was something that, done properly, could have been told in a context to help for further understanding of Canada's role in the Civil War.
that
And
museum in
just,
Frederick, the medical museum, probably would appreciate a phone call about that one. But I bet you they
yeah,
would, or they could have put that monument at the Plank Farm over here.
yep,
The Plank Farm, if you guys know where it is, if you're going down towards Breams Hill in Gettysburg, right by the Black Horse Tavern, you take the left and it's right down that road. Um, American Battlefield Trust owns it, but apparently the guy who lives there doesn't know that and doesn't like people on his property.
nope,
But be careful because people down here don't like visitors. But again, yeah, that's a thing. I mean, that's certainly one that but that's why you tell the story. That's why
yep,
you do the podcast, why you write the books, while you do the presentations, because you want to spread the history. And a lot of the history is debunking misconception,
mhm,
right? And that's the hardest thing, is we said before, is teaching old dogs new tricks with these
yeah,
things. And also people hear, litmus test, good, bad, black, white, right? They don't, there's the gray areas where a lot of these things are.
yeah. Grant asked, were there any Canadian officers in the Civil War of note? Yes, and I
Right.
said, told Edward Doherty,
Right.
involved in the capture of John Wilkes Booth. There was a guy with the last name of Keyes involved in the capture of Jefferson Davis.
Mm-hmm.
It's alleged that a Canadian was the one to kill Jeb Stuart. His name was John Huff.
John Huff, yeah. He
And
wasn't an
there,
officer. I don't think he was an officer though.
no, not, but still, he's a Canadian who
Well,
fought
Doherty
in,
was
yeah,
660 New York, Lincoln's
yep.
Adventures.
And
Yep.
he's buried in Arlington National Cemetery, which is pretty
Yep.
cool.
Yep.
And she was not an officer. She was a soldier. She disguised herself, but
Oh, here we go.
Sarah Edmonds from Nova
Yeah.
Scotia.
Yeah,
She
no,
was,
they're definitely out there, and it's one of those things where you can realize that it's not Chevrolet Mary, it's not all American.
no,
That's the deal.
no. And the bulk of them did fight for the Union, but there were some that fought for the South. And I don't think you can really say Solomon Secord was fighting for the South. He was a surgeon.
Uh,
Like,
nope, he was a doctor.
yeah, and he was just like he took an oath to uh help people with like the doctor's oath or whatever. And
Yeah,
um again, it was interesting when I dug around some more why Canadian surgeons were wanted was just for that training they had that they could do amputations. They understood that area of medicine a little bit better than what the training was that they were receiving down here.
plus
So they already
they always said sorry after they cut your arm off too.
sorry.
Sorry.
Frank mentions that Franklin, Tennessee still has their Confederate monument, but they chose to do the fuller story that puts the monument in perspective.
I mean, it's all educational. I mean,
Yeah,
look, monuments by definition are they're memorials.
yeah,
They're designed to memorialize something. But again, you talk all day about these damn statues. But I mean, the thing about it is not all statues are created the same, and
no.
that's the problem. Is that
Mhm.
you have to look at the context of the statue. In a statue like the Secord statue, the monument,
Yeah,
it's not the Nathan Bedford Forrest statue.
no,
It's not it's not the it's not one of these civil rights era statues, and
no.
that's the dangerous part about it. Is you see it all the time. Is you find people hear one thing and they just assume good or bad, and
Yeah,
we've beaten this thing to a dead horse. But I mean, but
yeah.
that's
Well, we never talked about it on here. But I mean, it was something that I felt, and it was a friend of mine back home that did the initial story. He's a news reporter. He did the initial story, and that's how I came to know about it because he had written it and did the story about it. And we knew though when we went there in April because we went to see the monument and it wasn't there, and we're like, what's going on? Why is it not
yeah,
here?
went all the way to Kincardine and it was gone. But luckily, we went to the brewery.
That was in Blythe, yes. That was a good time.
But not far away though.
Yeah, cowbell. Um, I'm just looking at these comments here. Oh, AQ mentions that Max Weber, I think he's another German, raised
Turner
the
Rifles.
Turner Rifles.
Turner Rifle. Yeah, no one knows about him. Good for Andrea knows her stuff. She does.
AQ, yes. She and I went on a 9 mile walk when she was in Gettysburg last
No,
week.
she's real good. I mean,
Yeah.
but no, there's a lot of people who, and you self learn, you study this stuff on your own, you become an expert in certain things. She's certainly we look at her with obviously Frances Channing Barlow, obviously,
Yeah.
but she's more than just that. But no, it's good for her. We had a
Yeah.
good time with her last week. But
Yeah.
but
That was fun.
she's one of the people who is she's fun because she's quiet, but she knows what she's talking about.
Oh, we can have such
You know,
such a good history discussion with her. Like her, Lynn, you and I, we had that like talking history while sitting at her works. That was
no,
really
no,
fun.
it's good. I'm glad she's on it. She's really cool. So it was good to
Yeah.
see her last weekend.
Mark said that he's like, I'm still here and can't let that pass. First course on this
Mark
11th course
Blanchard,
skedaddling. Yeah,
you're
he's
still
like,
here, Mark. I hope you don't mean that parking lot at State College.
oh, that was brutal.
Oh my God, that's something.
They said the first course saw the 11th course skedaddling and they thought they should support their friends.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I mean, East Cemetery Hill, there's some truth to that. I mean, Von Gilset said, he did take off. And you did have Wainwright telling his battery, Ricketts battery, you're going to stay here, die here, because the
Yeah.
Germans, as soon as it gets hot, they're going to take off. They're going to exit stage right, which they did. And it led to that knife fight on July 2nd,
Yeah.
right? Where Sam Carroll comes. And not only him, though, people, the Second Corps people all get excited about Samuel Carroll. But Shizanovsky also came
Yeah.
from the 11th Corps to help stem the tide, to push back Avery and Hayes and kind of hold that crucial part of the battlefield, which would have been a disastrous loss. So yeah, but it's good to see Mark on here too. That was a great day.
That was a fun day. Yeah. Mark's a great guy to hang out with. AQ said, see, I know more than Barlow. Exactly. We know you know more than Barlow just from talking to her. She'd like.
No, that's why you don't get pigeonholed. But we went to the cocktails and cannonballs event last Friday night.
Yeah.
I don't think we've done this live thing since we did that. I don't know if we did.
We did one on Tuesday.
Did we? But so we went to
I
that, and
think,
she was
yeah.
there. She was there, and a lot of people we knew were there, and that's a great time. If they do that every year in September here in Harrisburg, and if you come down, you should definitely go to that because
Mhm.
it's like a Civil War nerd convention. I mean, it
Yeah.
just is. You've got whiskey samples. You got Getty's Gear with their cigars. The great Carrie Gregory is there with his wife Janet, and it's just like it's like a celebration of people who study the Civil
And you
War. And
can come and like dress up too. And like if you've got the Civil War gear or whatever, you can dress up in it. And it's a fundraiser for the museum. It's their primary big fundraiser.
Mhm.
We were there doing trivia. It was a lot of fun. We hope we get to help them out with the next year because it's always a fun time. It's fun coming up with the trivia questions. It's fun just talking to people. And the museum changes their exhibits quite a bit too. So they are definitely, if you were in the area of like Gettysburg, Harrisburg, any within a like, I don't know, within a 2 hour range, it's worth it to go see it, you know?
But it's a beautiful. As far as a museum goes, dare I say it's better than the visitor center at Gettysburg? It is,
I would
right?
agree.
I mean, we saw a lock of Pickett's hair,
Yep.
his little curly Q, right?
Yep.
Smells like perfume you found off a dead Frenchman, right?
So
But
bad.
you got a lot of cool things there. You a lot of Lee stuff, a lot of
Yep.
obviously Union stuff too. But they do a good job interpreting both sides. But if
Yep.
you're in the area, it's in all the money is raised for that to help
Yep.
charities stuff like that. So definitely check them out. And if you do go, tell them we said hello.
Yep.
Dean and Mary Beth are really great.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, it's a really, really fun time. There was some talk in here about, I'm just going back a little bit about that. Lou had mentioned seeing I think it was a talk on C-SPAN given by one of Hood's ancestors that also wrote a book. David Maxwell mentioned reading it and said, I'm going to agree with David. It was well researched, but still 100% believe he never should have gone beyond division command. I have not read the book yet. I need to. I've heard about it, but I definitely agree with that
Who's this? Who we
sentiment.
talking about now?
John Bell Hood, just they were talking
Yeah,
about the book
yeah.
that was written by his ancestor.
I mean, look, everyone has their ceiling, right?
Yep.
Everyone has that's the deal,
He
and
hit it hard.
sometimes you get promoted above your you go get above your skis, and I think people look at Hood and they tend to focus on Tennessee, but I think you really got to look at Atlanta with Hood, and if you study those battles, all of them, you realize that he probably wasn't ready for prime time yet.
No,
You
no,
know, but
completely
but
agree.
but but again, but people disagree, and that's cool too. So.
Yep, yep. But yeah, that book is out there written by John Bell Hood's ancestor,
Mhm.
which I've heard, that it's like David Maxwell said, it's well researched, but again, Hood was definitely in over his skis. Um, and then speaking of books, the Derek Maxfield one that we bought
Mhm.
is from the Emerging Civil War series, which is a great, great series to have. Um, Humor and history. I had to explain Special Order GTFO to my son. We're so sorry.
Who knows where that one came from?
What's Special Order GTFO?
Yeah, sometimes we forget they're youngins. You know, well, it's funny because we went into Getty's Gear and
Yeah.
they have a TV, and we went in there, and by happenstance they were playing a video of one of these lives we do, and people are watching and they're having and it had that moment of like, you with your potty mouth. you know,
I
like
know.
we should back off the swearing as people are watching it. But yeah, GTFOs.
Yes.
That 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 started. I think the first time I said that was probably maybe Spotsylvania. Maybe
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't
But
know. You've
yeah,
been
it's
saying, I mean, we were talking to Mark yesterday. He was asking us about like, Mark asked us a really good question about, is there someone that we've come along that like in our studies that we didn't know much about and now we really like? And we had to come up with some
yeah.
people
Mark's
that
hitting us with hard level thinking questions at 2 o'clock in the morning.
I know, but that was a good, and it made me,
No, it's a good question. That
I came up
was.
with Nathan Kimball. You said Dahlgren. I also said Hiram Granberry.
Yeah.
And then I said like ones that I wanted to learn more about were Lucius Polk, the bishop's nephew who fought with Patrick
Mhm.
Clayburn, just to find out more about him. I would like there's some like Carl Schurz is someone I want to learn more about
There's a
as
lot of
well.
people, and that's the thing too. Is as you study this and you kind of get into the weeds, right? You learn about these people, and so you find out all these cool little history tidbits, and that's the thing about it is you tend to you tend to find out about these people you never knew existed. I mentioned John Rogers Meigs. Again,
Yeah.
no one studies this guy because he was basically a lieutenant, a young officer, got killed. But because of him, it really led to the hardcore of that burning we talked about.
Yeah.
But when you study his history, it's just fascinating. Um, Age 22, I mean, he was a rising star in the Union Army, cut down. And you look at even people like Joseph Latimer,
Mhm.
Confederate side, King Burgoyne, Henry Burgoyne. There are
Yeah.
so many people you can study um, that that are just footnotes in American history. But because of of historians and because of
Yeah.
people who study this, you help in keeping these people alive, historical memory. And like they say sometimes people don't truly die if you keep their memory alive. You keep talking about them, right?
Exactly.
And that's the thing is you find these people you resonate with. That was a great question he asked yesterday. Um,
I also
but
said Minty and Wilder, which Humor and History said that they didn't know much about them. And then we've mentioned them in a few episodes. I gravitate to more John T. Wilder. You gravitate more towards Minty, which is really interesting.
Well, because it's like the Virginians and North Carolinas, Mary. The Virginians get
Yeah.
all the credit, North Carolina did all the work, right? That's the truth. Robert Minty did all that. John Wilder gets the credit. He goes on, he runs in politics, and hey, look, I like both of them. Don't get me wrong. There was two sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
But again, you look at these people and you find out, okay, this is not somebody you're going to hear about in 11th grade social studies, right?
No.
Um, so when you look at it, but this is where the rubber hits the road with a lot of these people.
Yeah.
Is you could talk about your Grants and your Lees all day you want, but when you study guys like John Rogers Meigs, for example, right, you start to talk about these small people in the historical memory. That's what the Civil War is,
Yeah.
that's why it's so personal. This
Yeah.
when you look at it, because people
We
have relatives and
yeah.
and you and we can't associate, we can't relate to a U.S. Grant or a William T. Sherman or a Jubal Early because they're a different breed. They're just a
Yeah.
different person.
I think there are some aspects of their
You you
personalities
you
that you
you
can
you
relate to.
you can, but you can relate to a Hiram Granberry.
Yeah.
And look, I don't mean the North Side. I just mean people you know, who rose, who only fought because the war brought them into it. These were not fighting men. These are attorneys, right?
Yeah.
Who ended up taking over regiments. Guys like John Brown Gordon,
Hmm.
right? 6 Alabama. He's an attorney living his own life. He gets pulled into it. We know them in history because of the war and the war only. But that's why you study it and you read a lot of these books and you find out these secondary people. So and they're important in American history, but again, no
Hmm.
one talks about them. No one does.
No.
They're just faceless people on a statue in some places or a book.
Yeah. David Maxwell, I know he does like reenacting and living history and all that. He said he's thinking of doing Minty for Western theater living history.
I mean,
That would
he's a
be awesome. No one does that. You
no,
know?
he's a good one. I mean, and these people who are brought into this, and a lot of times, one of my biggies, of course, is Edward Cross and
Yeah.
Charles Tilden's another one. There's a lot of them who I kind of just resonate with, um, because of just their circumstances, and the Edward Cross story is a great one, and it's been misinterpreted in a lot of different cases with him.
Yeah.
Um, for different reasons. And obviously, Tilden, the 16th Mains, is just a fantastic story. But everyone, if you look at that Oak Ridge and you get away from the 11th, you want to go see Sally, you want to see some of the other
Yeah.
monuments. Look
Yeah.
at that 16th Main and study them and look what they did on July 2nd of 1863.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know,
And like Humor and History mentions that they said I'm embarrassed to admit I didn't know about Robert Smalls. I'm thankful for learning it. Don't ever be embarrassed by something like that. Like there's plenty there's plenty all of us don't know. We learn from each other. And that's the whole thing is like, this like we were talking about this with Mark last night because we started this like 4 years ago. And there's kind of been this, we never intended this. There's been this sort of community spark up around it where, y'all come on here and talk, like you leave comments or you talk amongst each others. We have our roundtables, which yes, we are going to be doing another one soon. But like we learn from each other, and there's nothing like, don't ever be embarrassed because you don't know something. Like, we're here to learn from each other, and definitely not to judge. Like, I mean, the Montgomery Meggs' son, right? That was his son you mentioned.
Yeah.
I'd never heard of him. Fully admit that. And like, I
I
don't
mean,
know, I
you
like,
can it's not too far to or reach to say because it rained on October 1st of 1864 and these guys had rubber raincoats, it led to hundreds of barns being burned in Virginia
yeah,
because of weather. Because these guys did not have uniforms, they had rubber jackets on, and Megs they were thought they were bushwhackers, which are basically mercenaries and not
yeah,
soldiers. It's put Sheridan on a rant of destruction. And that's the thing too. You look at history; it changes on a dime. Little
yeah.
things happen. We were doing a MJ. We were doing a little wheat field tour last week down
Hmm.
here. We talked about those mistaken orders, those South Carolinians
Yeah,
who were charged in the peach orchard. And because of a misinterpreted order, the wrong regiment turned to the right, exposed their left flank. It led to the wheat field battle.
yeah,
So little things get you. That's what gets you, you know. But that's why you study history because
exactly.
it's because you can look back and I know people don't like the whole what if thing, but yeah, but it's what if is a big part of history.
Emerging Civil War, just, I think it was last year, put out a what if book, which is
Oh,
which is really interesting. I saw it over at the Heritage Center one day. And I mean, I've always enjoyed the what ifs because I think it shows like how well you know somebody, and it kind of like gives you a chance to think critically about what they've done in their career. And that helps you kind of think about, yes, they could have done well at this, or maybe they wouldn't have. Now, the one what if that we were talking about with AQ and Lynn, which AQ had to run off. She's got another 9 mile hike. So good luck with that. It was so fun walking with her. Oh, well, Grant just said, what's the biggest what if of the war?
I think honestly, in my opinion, again, opinion, not fact, the biggest what if is if what if Claiborne gets that job in Ohio and he stays with
Yes.
the
Oh,
Union?
yep. That's
Because
actually, I was
because
going down the Claiborne path too.
because don't forget too, you know, he wants to be a pharmacy, work in a pharmacy. And because he's Irish and because he never learned Latin and
Yep.
couldn't he never passed the exams to be a pharmacist, he ends up leaving Ohio, which I suggest if you can,
Hmm.
moving to Arkansas because he has a job offer. And while
Yep.
he's in Arkansas running this pharmacy, the war happens down in Helena, and he's going to fight now for where he is his home. If he gets that job in Ohio, you're going to have arguably one of the better field generals, or being a Union instead of
Yep.
Confederate. Claiborne is a hard fighting SOB, Mary. He did not
Yep.
issue too many special order GTFOs, Mary,
He did not.
right? He did not. Okay. Um, he pulled out a shillelagh and hit you with it, is what he did.
Yep. Well,
And
Grant
so,
mentions probably Stonewall Gettysburg. No.
no, that's the one that makes that is cringy. Well, because there's a million reasons why that wouldn't even happen. But that's my biggest what if because you
Mhm.
such a missed opportunity. The other thing too is what if Sherman stays in Louisiana, and he was so fervent for the Union,
Yep.
and this is a guy who, you know, his pre-war era life was not that great. I mean, aside from making, you know, cooking hash in the West Point
That
dorms,
was such a great story that
you know.
Maxfield told.
But he's a guy in Louisiana because he took that job in Louisiana to be the base of the president of what is LSU today, right?
Yep.
What if he goes down there and says, "Well, this is my home now. I'm going to fight for the Confederacy." That's another one.
Yeah.
But the Claiborne one's a big one,
That's one
and
I've often thought about too, because, Claiborne, he's an immigrant, and this is
and
one way that,
here's another what if, Mary. Robert E. Lee took a bullet on the side of his face at Second Manassas,
yeah,
right? What if that bullet was an inch to the right, killed Robert E. Lee at Second Manassas? How does that change history,
that's a that's a big one
right?
too. Well, I often think too, what if Joseph E. Johnston didn't get wounded at Seven Pines?
You know,
All that. But I think Claiborne is the biggest one. I think I definitely agree with you about that, because you look at him, how he felt about Arkansas when he finally settled there, when he got settled. So he's an immigrant, and this is one way I've said this before, that that's how I'm an immigrant too. So I relate to him as finding his home somewhere that you're not born, which is what I relate to. I found my home
Mhm.
here. Um, and I think he goes to Arkansas and he settles there. And he finds friends. He finds something he never had in his life before, which is kind of he's not constantly moving around. He's found a place where he's accepted. He joins the Freemasons. He joins a debating society. He gets involved in local politics. He becomes like, I think he starts to read the law and start to become a lawyer. He's a pharmacist. He's very well known. And he always said, you know, I was fighting for my home. And I think if he had found that in Cincinnati, we would have one of the best Northern Union generals, like in him.
Yeah,
And
and you have to look at circumstance with a lot of these things too. And the reason why the Stonewall at Gettysburg one gets me is because the only reason why the Battle of Gettysburg happened was because, well, I don't say the only reason, but a big reason is because Jackson was dead. So instead of two corps, now there are three, right? With A.P.
yeah,
Hill and Ewell. And because they're so spread out, and he gets stories of the Union cavalry with Buford, and eventually the army being close, Lee has to bring them all together. He has to blow the conch shell and bring them together. And because the Gettysburg Road Network was the focal point, was the nexus where they can go, that's why the battle happened. But if Stonewall's alive, they're not spread out that much. The
no.
battle probably takes place in Harrisburg. The Chamber of Commerce at Harrisburg is probably regretting that Stonewall Jackson death, the money they would have made.
Would
But I mean,
Piccolos be the blue and gray?
Piccolo's would probably be the mine. You know,
Oh,
you know.
Piccolos,
If you want to have a good time, dress in a Confederate uniform, walking to Piccolo's on Friday nights.
don't do that.
Say you're a reenactor. But I mean, again,
Don't do that.
but if you but that's the thing is the battle likely would have been more further north into the west because the supply line is Second Winchester, right? So the reality is it couldn't have happened or wouldn't have. The likelihood of a battle of Gettysburg with Stonewall is very unlikely because his army would not have been spread out because you had Ewell's guys north of town. You had remnants going towards York, right, with guys like
Yep.
Early and
Yeah.
going over there, Wrightsville Bridge, all that stuff. So you bring them all together and you look at that 10 road network. That's why it likely wouldn't have been here. But I mean, people, you hear it. You go to the battlefield,
Yeah.
people ask that question sometimes. Well, what if Stonewall were here?
I'm
Stonewall
like,
would have.
ugh.
My favorite one is Stonewall would have taken that hill because him and Lee were of
No.
like mind.
Oh
They would have
God.
taken, like, give me a friggin' break. But that's the thing. It's good because if you can have a good solid what if conversation, it means the history. You know what really
Yep.
happened. And you're looking at
Yep.
the alternative history. So it's good, but that's
Yep.
that's my deal, whatever.
Well, I think like, looking at the thing with Claiborne, like when you look at how he felt about Arkansas, had he stayed longer in Ohio, he probably would have felt that way. And I often feel he would have been a Western theater general. So he would have been at battles like Chickamauga.
Can you imagine Grant with Sherman and Claiborne?
Holy shit.
Oh, seriously.
I
I mean,
try not to swear on here anymore, but oh my God.
yeah, sorry about that if you're at Getty's Gear,
Yeah.
having your coffee with your children. That's on her. But I mean, but the reality is that that's true though. You're taking your probably what would have been one of your and Grant would have recognized that talent too.
Yeah.
And who knows? I mean, the Irish thing was a real deal, but he likely would have made he might have could have made core in the Union.
I think he would have. Yeah. I think he would have. I think he would have been like, I don't know, like that's probably the biggest what if right there is if Claiborne had fought for
I
the
think
North.
I think personally, that's in my opinion, that's the biggest what if.
Yeah.
And again, people say, oh, okay, fine,
Some people would say Albertson Johnson.
well,
So Frank
there's a
said,
whole bunch of them. I mean,
so Frank said, could you imagine if Claiborne had Schofield's spot at Franklin or if he was Thomas at Nashville?
yeah. I mean, he's a hard fighting, smart battlefield guy who was trained kind of through experiences, he knew how to read the room. He knew the big picture. And that's what got him in trouble with the Confederacy was his little Emancipation Proclamation.
Yep.
You know?
What did you say? Like, remember you were talking about that one time and you were like, the people must have been sitting around and Joseph E. Johnson was probably like, what are you high?
Yeah, probably. I mean, he probably wrote it on a Lucky Charms box and handed it to Johnson. but
Well, and then who
that
was it? Shot Pouch Walker
shot
was
pouch
like,
Walker,
this really displeases me.
yeah, you didn't like that one bit.
Well, him and his mother had a lot of,
No, he
um,
was, yeah, but again, that's a, and you can go back and forth too. You know, what if Thomas stayed in the Confederacy from Virginia? I mean,
yeah,
you could play this all day, but that's the whole thing. Um, but again, you look at what Claiborne ended up being, and I think what a huge, I think he was such a talent, the Confederates. He was that guy in the bullpen who you just didn't use right in a
yeah.
lot of cases, where they kind of, he had a lot of great moments. He certainly did. We talked
Mhm.
Pickett's Mill, we talked about a million times, right? Um, and for the most part, he was one of their better guys. But again, for different reasons, he kind of had his head held down, and so
Yeah.
that's the thing. Um, but he was good though. He
Oh
was.
God, he was so, I mean, in that biography, it's actually been a year since we had Craig Simons on here to talk about his biography about Patrick Claiborne, which Stonewall of the West, amazing book. It's one of my favorite biographies. It and what's it called? Fierce Patriot, by Robert L. O'Connell about William Sherman are my two favorite biographies because they're so well written. They're two very different biographies, just in the style that they're written, but they're so good and you learn so much about the subject in them. Humor and history, like your Lucky Charms comment. We're
Yeah.
laughing. And then humor and history also said, what if Lincoln had never won the presidency?
Well, I mean, right. I mean,
Like that's another one. Lou asked if Polk hadn't violated Kentucky neutrality, but had let Halleck and Grant be blamed for it, would Kentucky have been more favorable to the Confederacy?
probably, probably. I mean, don't we talk about the governor? The guy we call McMuffin,
Yeah.
right?
Ruffin?
Um, he was a very hard Southern sympathizer, but his hands were tied. And even after everything went down, but when he invaded Southwest Kentucky, there when they went into that, it just totally screwed them. I mean, if you're Jeff Davis and these guys, the face palming, like, why? What did you do?
Yeah.
That was the thing too, and so you had, you want to have a good what if game, Mary. What if Maryland went seceded? You know, then Washington's totally surrounded.
That would have been,
But I mean, if you want to look at Lincoln, like anybody else, he's got his good moments, he's got his bad moments.
yeah.
One of his very underrated best moments was keeping the border states and not having them
Yes.
secede. Now you had places states like Missouri and Kentucky who were southern leaning, but they, like, especially Missouri, and I guess in Kentucky for that matter, because they relied on Union commerce. But Maryland I mean, was very, 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 especially south of Washington,
Yeah.
but even Baltimore. We talk about the Pratt Street riots, April '61, right? That's a southern state. It really, really is. If that, and I know he did a lot of sketchy crap of putting the Congress in jail and a lot of suspending
Oh,
habeas
that
corpus.
was really
And,
sketchy.
and
Yeah.
but I mean, if Maryland seceded, that's a tough day for Mother Mary
Hmm.
if he does. And that's a very underrated aspect of Lincoln's presidency. And I know it's tyrannical. People in the South say that, but being able to hold that line together was one of his better moments,
Yeah.
because Maryland goes south literally and figuratively. I'm not sure how Washington is sustainable.
Oh, that, yeah,
They'd have
that,
to move it. They'd move the capital to Boston, Mary. Dunkin'
yeah.
Donuts for everybody.
Um, there's a comment, what if the South had better railways? And that's a good one too, because so there's a book about it was written by Ted Widmer, who was a speechwriter for one of the presidents, I think actually Obama. And he wrote a book about Lincoln's journey to the White House, like just literally the train journey that he took. And he talks about how the railways in the North were built much better than the railways in the South. And that's to do with the different gauges of rails. So different gauges means you need different size wheels or something like that. I don't know. I'm not an engineer, but that's why Lincoln had to change trains in Baltimore, was because there was the different gauges
Right.
and the rails didn't link up like they do today. So that is a really good one about the infrastructure. And Widmer in his book, I think it's called Lincoln's Greatest Journey, he does argue that that was one reason why the South didn't do as well at the war, was because their infrastructure just was not in place. And that was something too that Sherman knew as well. And Maxwell mentioned this in his talk about him the other night, just that, when Sherman went off on his friend, when he found out that Louisiana was seceding and there was going to be possibly a civil war, he was like, you won't win because guess what? We've got the better infrastructure. It'll be a
Well, I mean,
long, hard war, but we've
well,
got the better infrastructure.
well, a lot of the Union railroads were built because guys like Herman Hopt, right? It was because the reason why the United States today has a great rail system is because of the Civil War in a lot of cases, because it was by, mother of invention is the mother of necessity. They're freaking stupid phrases, but they had to build that. And a guy like Hopt, who had that house right down here at the corner of Fairfield Road and Confederate Avenue, he was a big part of that. And so you want to talk about how the Civil War really gave a steroid injection into infrastructure in this country that helped later on with like Spanish American War, World War One, because it really pushed the country industrially into it. Now the South will disagree with you because unfortunately they had a lot of their infrastructure destroyed.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, the railroads today, a lot of the transportation methods today, which led to things like supplies and transport, are because of that, because they had to move troops here and there. Airline tickets were so expensive back then, Mary, they couldn't afford it in the military because it was all going towards the war efforts. They had to do trains. Fun fact. You see the picture with Sherman with the airplane in the background. That was one of the.
That's amazing.
That's one of the.
He had 14 Tomcats with him.
That's one of the rare ones.
So Grant said, "Don't forget Lincoln's work against vampires." Great book, by the way, Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter.
Yeah, that's a good one.
That is a fun read. Humor and history. The other what if everyone mentions is European intervention.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about that, and there's a million different reasons, why it's easier said than done. I mean, the slavery thing was a big part of it. It really, really was. But again, too, is you had the British. There was politically, England and France had every reason to root for the Confederacy to help them with this because they're monarchies at the time, right?
Yeah.
And some people's countries, Mary, still have pictures of the Queen in their
or king
buildings. Or king now. What you got?
Yeah, Allie Kay sent us that yesterday. She was at
a
brewery.
Right.
King Charles.
But they wanted this American experience of democracy to fail. They really, really did. England specifically had their cotton completely cut down because of the embargo, because of the Anaconda Plan, because of the embargo, but they could not cross that threshold of supporting a slave state because they had just got rid of slavery. They really, really did. So it was it was a real issue for them to deal with it. Now, if they were to get involved in the war, it's hard to imagine them supporting the Confederacy for political reasons. But if they did, if England got involved in it and France got involved in support of the Union, they could not afford another war with France either.
No.
And France could not afford another war with England. So on its face, England would have loved to have the Confederacy win. They should have supported them to help open up that cotton network, but they did build ships for them. You had Birmingham, you had the blockade runners. So they sort of did intervene, but they did it kind of right on the Enfield weapons on the down low. But it's kind of like the way a modern war right now, where you're supporting your country against your enemy. You give them weapons, you give them other things, but you can't go all in for different reasons. You think of Ukraine right now, right?
Yeah.
Where they're trying to hold back Russia. And that's a big part of it now but they couldn't recognize, they really couldn't. Once the Emancipation came out, the proclamation came out on January 1st of 63, that was a kick in the junk for any intervention. Because at that point, Lincoln made the war about slavery and freedom.
Yeah.
They couldn't get involved at that point because they would look completely foolish considering their own personal histories. Yeah. But that would have been a big one. Because now what was Lincoln going to do? Lincoln, because of the Civil War, scared the hell out of the British because he gave his Navy a jump start. England had always been the most powerful Navy in the world at that point. Now you have ironclads to deal with. So do you really want to get involved in a war with the North after the Civil War with the Navy situation kind of flip-flopping too? But what was that, the Alexander Rose book? Remember we had him on that time?
Oh, it was
Um,
so good. It
the
was such a good
lion
book.
and the fox,
Yeah, The Lion and the
right?
Fox. That was a really good book.
He, we had an episode with him on about a year or so ago, and he's the one who,
So for people that don't know, Alexander Rose is the guy that wrote the book about Turn, Washington
yeah,
Spies.
the TV show Turn.
Yeah.
That's him. So we had him on one time, and he wrote a book called The Lion and the Fox, which was about England's intervention into the American Civil War. And after the war, Andrew Johnson wanted Canada
Hmm.
annexed to the United States as retribution for what they did help the Confederacy.
Wish he
And
had make my life way easier.
they settled on $200 million, which is a lot of money. $10, a lot of money, right?
Yep.
That's what they did. So England did kind of intervene, but just not
Yep.
officially. Um, and they paid the price for it. They did.
Oh, they did. Leonard's on here. He said, "What Civil War Navy talk? LOL."
Leonard. Yeah.
Leonard.
Hey,
Bowen.
Leonard, congratulations on your Bama team last night, man. We were sitting in a parking lot all night last night in State College, Pennsylvania, hearing about the exploits of one Crimson Tide coming back on Georgia, which I was thinking about you because I know you're a big Bama guy.
But
What a
Sherman
game
getting
that
his
was.
vengeance.
Yeah, absolutely. No question.
I was going to say regarding kind of, if there's European intervention and all that, you do have these pockets, like in Canada specifically, Leonard said Roll Tide, specifically in Montreal that are aiding the Confederates. So Montreal is like, that's the dollar store Confederacy during the Civil War. That's
Yeah,
where
well,
like Jefferson Davis's brothers up here doing stuff. John Wilkes Booth has a bank account up here. And they're all like, and this is where John Surratt flees after the or right before the assassination. And it's interesting when you look at the history of Montreal and the province of Quebec, it's something that I'm always like, this does not shock me because I've had some Canadians say to me, like, oh, how could we be that involved? It's like, have you seen the history of Quebec? They're like, they've tried to secede twice from the country with a referendum. They're due for one now because they haven't had one in like 30 years. But when you look at it, like that's where all the secessionist Confederate stuff was. And I think because they did sympathize with them. They were like, well, we've been trying to get out of this country because, or sort of country. We weren't a country during the Civil War. So there was that kind of sympathy, you know?
Well, I mean, again, England and France for the most, not as
Yep.
much as England. England was they couldn't intervene, but they did find a way to throw a crimp in the junk of the Union, Lincoln. They just did it different ways,
Yep.
right? Sarah Slater, the woman in the black veil, right?
Yep.
Who disappeared with all that Confederate money and all that gold, which is still missing out there. Oak Island Mary, right? But that's a big part of it is they did intervene to a point, but it was a dotted line intervention. They did not want the Union to win that. For obvious history, but they couldn't get involved. They could not get involved. But they worked behind the scenes to get weapons to the Confederacy, to try to run the blockade, to try to have a spy network out of England. I mean, out of Canada, right?
Yep.
I know it's French Quebec, but again, it's still Canada.
That's what Grant asked. Didn't Southern spies go into Canada? They did. Leonard said dollar store Confederacy. LOL, love it.
Well, I mean,
They are the dollar store Confederacy.
Oh, it was in 1867. You guys decided it's because of the Civil War. You guys decided to have your own country.
Yeah, because we didn't like being on the chopping block.
Yeah, but you still couldn't cut the cord. You just need someone to throw some tea in the water, and you that's all you need.
Should go do that in Lake Huron sometime when we're back in Canada.
They'd love to see that.
Yeah. Humor and History asked if I recall, didn't Irish try to invade Canada like twice? Yeah, the Fenians.
The Fenians, right? Yeah.
That's why Sherman came to my hometown, was to tell us that the Irish were not going to invade Canada.
Yeah, and he rolls in, and they think he's the Fenians.
Yeah,
maybe because his big red hair. He probably thought it was William Wallace, Scotland, coming in. For God's sake, you Canadians, you probably sat there and throw maple syrup at him. But you can go. You can go to Goderich, your hometown, and you can go see the Sherman tree, which is still there. There's a marker for it, where Sherman commented when he cruised into the harbor from Lake Huron that he witnessed this big tree standing on the ridge, and that tree's still there. Yep. And you can go, so you can see the hotel, the foundation where he stayed, and you can see that house at the point of the water, right?
Yep. And also, so I once asked my grandmother, why the cannons all pointed towards the lake. And she told me that's to keep the Fenians out
Mhm.
for when they come across Lake Huron and try to invade us. And I was like, wow, I'm like 4. I'm like, what is this?
What
But
are they
that's
going
what
to do if they invade Goderich? So what are they going to take over West End Willie's? What are they going to do?
I don't know. I don't know. But all the cannons facing out towards Lake Huron. My grandmother told me that was to keep the Fenians out.
Well, I mean, that's of course they're going to have them towards Lake Huron. If you're going to be
Yeah.
attacked, that's where it's coming
But that's
from.
a great story though, that she had it like as
Oh,
soon as I asked, she was like, yes, this is why.
well, I mean, that's probably the genesis of why the cannon are there. But yeah, but that's great. You have that personal connection, telling these stories of the fighting Fenians, Mary.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, I've got a book about it. I've got to read that one of Colleen sent us about the Irish
Oh
in
yeah.
Canada. Leonard said Terry Winchell is a Penn State grad. Y'all were practically at Vicksburg.
There's a lot of connections. James Beaver, Beaver Stadium, right?
Yep.
There's a lot of Civil War things, and our friend Cody, who very succinctly pointed out on my Facebook page
Yep.
that you with your Howard shirt at Beaver Stadium was a 6 degree of separation, the Union
Yep.
Army, right there at State College, Pennsylvania. But yeah, no, this definitely some Civil War up there, no question.
Oh yeah. Leonard said put some sugar in the water though. Tea has to be sweet.
Oh God, here we go. That's okay. Yeah, where I'm from, we don't drink tea, we drink coffee.
I'm waiting for him to ask about Bowen next.
The gallant Bowen.
Bowen.
Anyway. All right. Well, we should really shut this thing down. It's 20 minutes to 12. Time flies, Mary. Time flies.
Yep.
But so we are gonna, like I said, we're gonna be doing an episode. We're gonna record it, I think, Friday, right? About the burning.
Yep.
And when you said the burning, we're talking about Sheridan in the Valley. We're not talking about AP Hill P and Mary. We're talking about the Sheridan. So we'll have fun with that. And that's a very fascinating story, talking about that, because it's a very
Yep.
dark, very, like I said before a while ago, there's a very dark aspect of American history.
Yep.
And you got to shine light on it, because it
Yep.
really, really is. And if you're down in that Dalton area, Harrisonburg area, you've got relatives who lived through this, and they still talk about it. They still call it the burning district from where it
Yep.
was.
I know Miranda, our friend, she had ancestors that lived there during it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, who knows?
No,
Probably one of Tony's cousins.
Tony.
Anyway, all right. Why don't we jump off? It's
Yeah.
now 11:45, so we're gonna find some stuff to do today. So hopefully have a good weekend. Maybe, just maybe, we'll see sun some point. It's been cloudy and rainy for a full week here. And so it'd be nice to see the sun again. Everybody's be walking outside covering their eyes.
Like vampires. Humor and History said, thanks for all you do. You made the Civil War fun for my son and I. Oh, well, you're welcome. Thank you for listening. And Hal said, greetings from Littleton, Mass.
Littleton, Mass. Holy moly. I have friends in Littleton. When I grew up in Waltham, Mass. And we used to go to Littleton from time to time. My mother had friends out there, so we'd go visit Littleton. Yeah, good little place. Nice, one of those little hamlets in the old Commonwealth, which is always fun to go.
And Frank mentioned he's going to be here in November.
So is he?
With him. Yep.
Are you coming for Remembrance Day weekend?
It's coming from the 17th to the 22nd.
Yeah, that's Remembrance Day weekend.
So around Remembrance Day, yep, around that time. Yep.
Yeah, be a lot of people in town that weekend, Mary. You better behave yourself. People be watching. The police will be out in force looking for, you with your IPAs.
Hal just asked, Watch City.
Watch City Wall, yes, Waltham, the old Waltham watch, yes, sir. That was a claim to fame. You can still get a Waltham watches on eBay today, the originals. That was back I think my grandmother used to either work in the old factory, which is still there. We used to play street hockey in the park a lot when I was growing up. They had a huge park a lot, Mary. You can play street hockey there, right along the Charles River. Yeah,
I used to play street hockey.
I'm sure you did.
Yep. And Hal said, I used to live on Summer Street.
Oh, really? Okay. Wow, my old school. My friend Chris used to live on Summer Street, Mary.
Shopping carts. Humor and History mentions they said greetings from Allentown, PA. So yeah, you're not too far from us. Great breweries there.
What's that? Was it Fegley's?
Fegley's and Sherman Street, and then there's another one. Something cooperative.
Um, that yeah, there's a bunch in there. But that Allentown's a cool little place, and that's about
Yeah.
2 hours from Gettysburg or so, maybe a little bit more. But that's a cool little town, Allentown. They got that big amusement park there, Mary. You
I
can
know.
ride your roller, you can ride your roller coasters.
I want to go there.
Definitely. Anyway, all right. Well, let's jump off. So we'll get ready to go. So yeah. So you guys have a great weekend. So we'll do the episode. We are going to be announcing a roundtable as soon as someone sends the emails out when we pick a date.
We have to announce it and then I send the emails out. But we've had kind of a hectic couple weeks. So
no, it's been busy. So we'll get that going. So we'll get that going with that. So definitely.
Humor and History, by the way, is Jeff Fedgley, that is a friend of mine. The brewery
Oh,
guy.
cool. Well, tell him he does great work, and tell him we
We just had
appreciate.
the pumpkin beer. It was awesome.
We had that yesterday. We had that
A couple days ago.
No, let him know that he's doing God's work, because that's a fantastic brewery down in Vegas.
Yeah.
When we sat there at the bar that one day, there. Remember?
That was such a good beer. Great food too. Like all of it was great. Loved it.
No, it's
And we can find the beer here in Gettysburg too, which is awesome.
Yep, so some of the crap places. Anyway, all right, we have a great weekend. Hopefully the sun is out where you are, because God knows it isn't here. Maybe someday it'll come again. Let us know if the sun still exists, actually, because we haven't known if it actually still exists anymore. But if it does, definitely let us know. It'd be nice to know. But we'll announce the round table here soon. We'll drop this episode later this week, and then we'll do this again. Probably no, it won't be next weekend. We're gonna be in Virginia next weekend, Mary. So we'll have to do it. We'll have to do the round table in lieu of a live next week.
Yes, we will.
Right.
Yeah, because we're not going to be around next weekend. Humor and History said his brother Rich is the brewer. They're going to pass it on. They're going to pass it on.
Yeah, that's Fegley's is good. That's good stuff here. And from where I'm from, there's microbreweries every street corner, like Dunkin' Donuts is back in Mass. That's up there with the big boys. So you let him know that he's up there with the treehouse level. He'll know what I mean by that. He'll know what I mean. So let him know that, because it is that good. All right. So let's jump off. Have a great rest of the day. Stay safe. Stay dry. Mary, your Cleveland Guardians start the playoffs this week. Can you believe it? They do. So we'll have to root for them. My Red Sox didn't quite make it, but again, next year.
Yeah,
we'll be back next year. So off we go.
Have a great day, y'all. We will see you again soon. Stay tuned for our next episode announcement about the roundtable, and we will definitely be back on here doing another live stream soon. Thank you for all your support with this for these past 4 years. You guys are awesome. We love the questions, love the discussion, love the community. It's awesome.
Absolutely. Enjoy your Sunday. Stay safe, stay dry, and we'll go soon. Go Patriots, Mary.